The structure of a ship in the 18th century is a living entity that breathes and moves constantly under the tension of the ocean and the temperature variations that expand or contract the wood of the hull. The solid planks of oak or teak that form the skin of the vessel never fit perfectly against each other in a watertight manner solely by the saw cut and the fixing of nails, as the organic nature of wood requires a minimum space to work without cracking. This small gap between the planks, known as the seam, is the most vulnerable point of all naval engineering of the time, the exact location where saltwater insists on penetrating, compromising the buoyancy and the precious cargo stored in the dark hold. The survival of the crew and the integrity of the mission entirely depend on the ability to seal these cracks against the relentless force of the sea and against the wood-eating organisms that devour the submerged wood. Without proper protection, constant moisture transforms the noble wood into a spongy and rotten mass in a matter of months, condemning the ship to become a floating trap that can split in two during a more violent storm. The master carpenter and his team of caulkers wage a silent and daily war against nature, using knowledge inherited from previous generations to create a waterproof barrier that needs to be flexible enough to accompany the twisting of the hull in the waves and strong enough not to be washed away by the friction of the water. The success of this undertaking does not reside in a single magical solution, but in a system composed of multiple layers of protection that begins long before the ship touches the water. The shipyard mentality is focused on absolute prevention, as a leak at sea requires exhaustive use of the bilge pumps, draining the energy of the sailors and spreading panic on board. The preparation for waterproofing requires a deep understanding of materials that naturally repel water, viscous substances and plant fibers that, when combined under pressure and heat, form an almost eternal seal, setting the stage for us to understand the forest origin of these vital components. The basis of all naval waterproofing lies in the vast coniferous forests of northern Europe or the American colonies, where the resin that will become the soul of the seal is extracted. The process begins with the controlled burning of roots and trunks of old pines in earthen ovens covered with grass, an ancestral technique that forces the wood to sweat its dark and sticky sap without being consumed by the flames. This thick and black liquid that slowly drips through channels dug in the ground is the wood tar, a substance with a pungent and penetrating smell that carries with it the preservative properties of the tree, essential to prevent salt water from starting the putrefaction process in the fibers of the hull. But raw tar is still too fluid for the most demanding caulking needs, which forces the artisans to subject it to a new refinement process by heat to transform it into pitch or tar. In large iron cauldrons set at a safe distance from the ships and wooden buildings, the tar is slowly boiled until its most volatile oils evaporate, and only a black, shiny, and solid mass remains when cold, but which becomes liquid and workable when heated. The constant danger of fire in these cooking sites requires total vigilance, as a moment of inattention can cause the mixture to overflow and ignite the entire shipyard, turning the pitch into an uncontrollable fuel. The quality of the pitch is assessed by its ability to adhere and elasticity, for it cannot be so hard that it cracks in the harsh winter of the North Atlantic, nor so soft that it runs under the tropical sun of the Caribbean. The master caulkers test the consistency of the mixture by chewing small pieces or observing how it behaves when stretched between the fingers, seeking the exact point of viscosity that will ensure the vessel's lifespan. With the waterproofing agent ready, attention turns to the stuffing material that will serve as a skeleton for this seal, a fiber that comes from reuse and tenacity. Before any drop of pitch touches the hull, the gaps between the planks need to be mechanically filled with a material capable of absorbing the resin and swelling when wet, physically blocking the passage of water. The raw material for this is rarely new, as the naval economy of the period dictates that old ropes and hemp cables already worn from intense use in sailing maneuvers and anchors, be reused to the last thread. These thick cables, impregnated with salt and old tar, are cut into smaller pieces and handed over to less skilled workers, prisoners, or apprentices who have the arduous task of manually untwisting the fibers. The work of chopping hemp is monotonous, dirty, and painful, requiring the fingers to separate thread by thread until the robust cable turns into a pile of loose and soft fibers, similar to tangled and coarse hair. The dust that rises during the process irritates the lungs and eyes, while the constant friction wears down the worker's hand skin, who need to ensure that no knots or hard parts remain that could hinder the uniform compression within the ship's seams. The resulting hemp needs to be fluffy enough to be compressed, but maintain the structural integrity of the long hemp fibers so that it does not disintegrate over time. The caulkers classify the hemp rigorously, separating the finest and cleanest fiber for the more delicate parts of the ship, and leaving the coarser hemp for the submerged hull and the main deck. An inadequate or poorly prepared supply of hemp can mean the failure of the entire caulking process, as it is this fibrous mass that will serve as a vehicle for the pitch and act as a natural expansion joint between the planks. With piles of soft hemp ready and the boiling cauldrons of pitch steaming beside the dry dock, the stage is set for the caulkers to begin the rhythmic symphony of hammers that will define the watertightness of the vessel. The caulking work is announced from afar by the unmistakable and sharp sound that dominates the soundscape of any shipyard or repair port. Unlike the muffled blows of carpenters shaping beams, the caulker uses a wooden mallet made from high-density noble wood, usually crafted from rosewood or live oak, with an elongated head and iron rings at the tips to prevent cracks, which strikes against the caulking irons, producing a rhythmic and musical tinkle. Each craftsman carries with him a personalized set of finely forged tools, ranging from the opening iron, used to widen very tight seams, to curved and fine irons designed to reach the difficult corners at the junction of the keel and the rabot, ensuring that no millimeter of the hull remains unprotected. The skill required to handle these tools is acquired over years of painful practice, where the apprentice begins by cleaning old seams and removing rotten material before being allowed to insert the new oakum. The caulker works in unnatural and exhausting positions, often lying on his back under the damp hull or suspended in precarious staging on the side of the ship, striking with millimetric precision above his own head. A miscalculation or misdirected blow results not only in crushed fingers, but can also damage the edge of the plank, creating a flaw in the wood that will be almost impossible to seal perfectly later, compromising the integrity of that section of the ship. The hierarchy on deck or in the dry dock is clear and respected, with the master caulkers dictating the rhythm of the blows that often involuntarily synchronize among the team, creating a hypnotic industrial cadence. They know the sound that the wood makes when it is solid, and the hollow and dangerous sound that indicates internal rot or a loose fastening in the nails. Before introducing the fibrous material, the caulker inspects the clean gap, checking that the opening is uniform and has the ideal wedge shape to receive and lock the oakum in place, paving the way for the most critical phase of mechanical sealing. The act of inserting the oakum into the seam is not a simple filling, but a controlled operation of violence that alters the physics of the hull, tensioning the planks against each other. The caulker takes a strand of fluffy oakum, lightly twists it with his pitch-stained fingers, and guides it into the gap with the caulking iron, using light strikes to fix the fiber in its initial place. The movement is repetitive and quick. The iron pushes a loop of oakum inside, pulls back, takes another portion, and pushes again, creating a compact accordion of fibers that must fill the depth of the seam without reaching the absolute bottom, leaving a vital space for the movement of the wood. When the seam is filled, The tightening or final pounding stage begins, where brute force meets refined technique to transform the soft oakum into a mass almost as hard as the wood itself. Using a thicker and heavier iron, the caulker, sometimes assisted by a helper striking with a larger mallet called a driving mallet, compresses the material violently until the iron is expelled by the elasticity of the compressed fiber itself. It is a dangerous balancing act. If the force is excessive, the lateral pressure may expel the plank from its nails or crack the noble wood. If insufficient, the oakum will remain loose and be washed away by the sea on the first voyage. The quality of the work is checked by touch and sound, as a well-caulked seam should repel the tip of the iron as if it were a solid rubberized wall. The experienced caulker knows that the hull must behave like a tensioned monolith, where the oakum acts like a flexible mortar that keeps everything together, even when the ship creaks and twists in rough seas. With the entire ship locked by the fiber, the seams appear as yellowed and fibrous lines running along the dark hull, thirsty for the final protection that will chemically isolate them from the salty water. With the mechanical structure of the seal completed, the process known as paying, the seams comes into play, an old term that designates the application of boiling pitch over the exposed oakum. An assistant runs from the steaming cauldron, bringing iron containers or long-handled shells filled with melted tar, a black and viscous substance that must be applied while still bubbling with heat. The caulker or payer pours the liquid with surgical precision over the seam line, using a special kind of ladle or a rustic mop to guide the flow, ensuring that the pitch penetrates the pores of the oakum and adheres to the edges of the adjacent planks. The contact of the infernally hot pitch with the cold wood and oakum generates a cloud of white and acrid smoke, releasing vapors that burn the eyes and throat but signal the successful fusion of the materials. The goal is to create a waterproof cover that, upon cooling, encapsulates the fiber, preventing it from rotting in contact with water and serving as the first line of defense for the ship. The work must be quick, as the pitch loses fluidity in seconds, and the craftsman needs to avoid letting the material run excessively on the hull, which would be an expensive waste and leave the finishing of the ship rough and uneven. After cooling, the excess hardened pitch is scraped off with iron spatulas, leaving only a smooth, black, shiny line, perfectly level with the surface of the wood. The visual result is the classic striped pattern of the decks and hulls of the time, an aesthetic that conceals the chemical and physical complexity of that barrier. However, for the parts of the ship that will remain permanently submerged in tropical waters infested with worms, only the pitch and oakum are not enough, requiring an additional layer of sacrifice and protection that covers all this meticulous work. The battle against water does not end with the caulking of the cracks, as the submerged hull faces an even more insidious and hungry enemy than humidity. Teredo navalis, a burrowing mollusk that acts like a termite of the sea, capable of turning the bottom of a ship into a fragile sieve within a few weeks of exposure in tropical waters. To combat this invisible plague, shipyards have developed a sacrificial protection technique, applying a thick and repulsive layer known as the coating over the main hull. This paste is not made of pure tar, but of a complex and foul-smelling mixture cooked in large cauldrons, combining rancid animal fat, ground sulfur, whale oil, and crushed glass or goat hair, creating a toxic and physical barrier that discourages the attachment of marine life. The application of this viscous paste, often yellowish or whitish due to sulfur and fat, transforms the bottom of the ship into a greasy and slippery surface. Workers spread the hot mixture with brooms made of palm fibers or cloth rags, covering every inch of the black pitch that seals the seams. On larger ships, or those destined for long voyages to the Indies, This chemical layer receives an additional mechanical protection, an extra skin of soft wood planks, usually pine or elm, nailed onto the original hull with thousands of wide-headed nails. The logic is cruelly simple. Allow the worms and slime to devour this cheap and outer wood, preserving the vital oak structure that keeps the vessel intact. Between the hull wood and this sacrificial layer, a sheet of thick paper soaked in oil or felt mixed with animal hair is often inserted, creating a sandwich of materials that makes it difficult for the tunnels excavated by the mollusks to progress. The smell emanating from this operation is a nauseating mix of rotten fat and volcanic chemicals, impregnating the clothes and skin of the craftsman. This organic armor, while effective for a limited time, requires constant and aggressive maintenance, forcing the ship to periodically undergo one of the most dangerous and spectacular operations of maritime life: the cleaning of the bottom, or careening. As masonry dry docks are rare, extremely expensive, and restricted to the largest military ports of naval powers, most vessels need to be waterproofed and cleaned on tide beaches or isolated sandbanks through the process of careening. The operation involves completely emptying the ship, removing cannons and ballast, and using powerful winches attached to the masts to tip the vessel sideways until the keel is exposed to the air. It is a moment of extreme tension, where the structure of the ship groans under its own weight out of water, and the risk of tipping completely or breaking the masts under the tension of the ropes keeps the entire crew on high alert, ready to cut the cables at the slightest sign of disaster. With the belly of the ship exposed and dripping, covered in algae, barnacles, and the dirty slime of months at sea, the cleaning crew armed with fire springs into action. Using bundles of dry brush, reeds, or torches soaked in tar, sailors and caulkers scorch the hull, quickly passing the fire over the wet wood to dry the surface and, above all, to loosen the marine incrustations and kill the parasites by thermal shock. The thick black smoke envelops the tipped ship, creating a hellish scene where men with iron scrapers attack the carbonized dirt, removing tons of biological debris that hindered the ship and concealed rot. As soon as the wood is scraped and exposed, the caulkers rush against time and tide to inspect the seams, replace the rotten oakum, and apply new layers of the mixture of fat and sulfur or hot pitch. The work is done in precarious conditions, on floating rafts, or with water and mud up to their waists, under the constant danger of the ship righting itself accidentally, or tools falling from the inclined hull above them. The careening is the renewal of the ship's life, a purification by fire and by manual effort that restores the lost speed and water tightness, but comes at a high cost to the bodies of those who perform the task. The body of a veteran caulker tells the story of his profession as vividly as the hull of an ancient ship, marked by scars of pitch burns and a posture permanently altered by years of confinement. The joints of the knees and hips suffer from early degeneration due to long hours spent crouched or lying in contorted positions inside damp and poorly ventilated holds, where the air is heavy with tar vapors and hemp dust. Partial deafness is a common companion, a result of decades of hearing the sharp clink of the hammer against iron in enclosed spaces that amplify sound like an echo chamber, creating a communication barrier that often isolates the older masters from the rest of the crew. Despite the physical harshness, there is a fierce pride and a rigid hierarchy among these craftsmen, who consider themselves the technical elite of the shipyard, often coming into conflict with the ship carpenters. While the carpenter builds the shape, the caulker ensures survival, and this distinction generates disputes over jurisdiction and payments, with trade corporations zealously guarding the secrets of their pitch mixtures and oakum spinning techniques. The master caulker has the authority to condemn a piece of wood as uncaulkable, paralyzing all work until the piece is replaced, a power he wields gravely, knowing that his signature on the hull is the guarantee that the ship will not become a submerged coffin. This responsibility weighs most heavily on sealing the most critical areas, such as the joinquise seam, the lowest and hardest junction to reach between the hull and the keel, which requires the caulker to work practically upside down and blind. The expression between a rock and a hard place, or equivalence in other languages, arises from this reality, where failing to execute means probable death at sea. The caulker lives, breathes, and dreams of the integrity of that thin line of oakum and pitch, the only thing separating the order of civilization on board from the absolute chaos of the ocean depths, a mission that is renewed with every ship launched to sea. As soon as the ship returns to its element, sliding off the ramp or righting itself in the tide after the launch, the final and silent verdict of all the caulking effort occurs. In the first hours and days, it is expected and even considered physiological for the hull to cry, cry, allowing small amounts of water to enter, while the wood dries and shrinks over time on land, beginning to absorb moisture and swell. This natural process of expansion is what finally compresses the toe with full force against the seams, closing the last microscopic capillaries that the caulker's iron could not seal mechanically. The crew and the master carpenter nervously watch the water level in the hold, listening to the dripping in the dark caverns, knowing that the safety of the journey depends on the wood swelling and sealing the hull before the water entry becomes uncontrollable. Even with the most perfect technical execution that 18th century engineering can offer, a wooden ship is never watertight in the modern sense of the word. It is, at best, a controlled and manageable sieve. The routine on board includes the religious operation of the bilge pumps, a grueling manual task that serves as the true thermometer of the hull's health. Experienced sailors analyze the expelled liquid. If the water is clear and clean, it is an alarming sign of a new and direct infiltration from the sea through a faulty seam. If it is dark, foul, and oily, it is the normal bilge water, tinged by tar, by hold debris, and by wood, indicating that the waterproofing is fulfilling its role as a barrier, allowing only the inevitable sweat of the structure to pass through. The waterproofing cycle, therefore, is not a definitive stage of construction, but a permanent and agonizing condition of the vessel's existence until the day of its dismantling or shipwreck. The very moment the ship leaves the protection of the port, the tropical sun already begins to dry and crack the pitch of the deck. The friction of the waves starts the erosion of the hull's tallow layer, and the Toritos resume their relentless search for a flaw in the armor. The pre-industrial shipbuilding industry does not defeat nature. It merely negotiates a temporary and fragile truce, buying buoyancy time with sweat, fire, and resin. Each mile sailed is a wear and tear that will be charged in future maintenance, ensuring that the sound of the caulker's mallets continues to be the heartbeat that keeps humanity floating over the blue abyss. Great navigations were sustained not only by the wind, but by the stubbornness of men who refused to let the water win. Honor the memory of this silent and laborious work by subscribing to the channel now. Share this video with those who value the true engineering of the past and respond in the comments. Which other extinct and dangerous profession deserves to be rescued from oblivion on our next journey? History counts on you not to be shipwrecked,